Hey everyone out there today, this is Rebekah with the Tailored Realty team.
And this is Leah with the Tailored Realty team.
And today we're about to blow your mind because we're talking about inspections. So first of all, is an inspection the same thing as an appraisal?
No. An appraisal is something that the lender orders to decide whether or not your house is worth the purchase price, but it's different from the inspection.
Yes, so there's a lot of confusion that I hear about this, especially when people are looking at different financing options. So the most common type of financing option here in the Twin Cities is conventional, FHA, VA, or of course cash. And if you have financing options pretty much in any sort of way, the lender is going to order an appraisal. But if you are FHA or VA, there might be more like a souped up type of an appraisal. And so for those ones, the appraiser is looking to make sure that the house meets certain conditions and certain criteria that they need to have to fund the loan. However, not the same thing as an inspection. So I definitely want to make sure that we dispel that myth right off the bat. So if you have an FHA appraisal, definitely not the same thing as an inspection. Okay, so what should people expect during an inspection?
People should always expect during an inspection to
what to expect when inspecting.
Yes. There will always be something that comes up on the inspection. It's never going to be perfect. There's no such thing as a perfect home.
But what if it's new construction?
Still then they will find something wrong with it, something to fix, something that maybe was missed or looked over and just not done properly. So something's always going to come up. You can always expect it, and it's not reason to panic necessarily.
Not reason to panic necessarily, but that is something to note, that there's no such thing as perfect. So as long as humans are involved with the building process, every single house, even new construction, is going to have some sort of a problem. The question is really just how big of a problem is it actually?
Which is why we always recommend that people get inspections even on new construction.
Right, so when you have an inspection, you have a couple of different options after you've had an inspection as the buyer. As the seller, you're just kind of waiting to hear where the buyer's at with things. But as the buyer, you can move forward with the purchase agreement. You can cancel, you could negotiate on price or terms possibly, but the seller does not have to necessarily agree with that. So know that if you have an inspection, depending on what's in your purchase agreement, there might be some different options and some different recourse. But an inspection is really just intended to let a buyer walk in, eyes wide open, knowing exactly what are the different issues with the house. But it's not a guarantee of condition. And that's important to note as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so what are some of the common things that people find when they're looking at inspections?
One of the biggest items that usually comes up is mechanicals. You always want to know the age of your furnace, your water heater, your AC, how long are these things going to last, how much life is left in them, were they serviced
don't last
properly?
For forever?
They don't last for forever, unfortunately.
Well, I guess they could. I know that my parents' house had a boiler and that lasted for a while. But here in Minnesota, the most common types of things that we have is we typically will have a furnace, which is with like the regular heating system, the forced heating system.
Mm-hmm.
So for a furnaces typically last 16 to 20 years. They could last 30 years, like that's not uncommon. Like I go into lots of houses that were built in the 1980s and they still have the original furnace and it's still kicking it.
Mm-hmm.
So I mean it could last longer, but I've also had houses where it's the furnace is 7 years old and it dies. So I mean that's an average 16 to 20 years.
Mm-hmm.
What about a water heater?
A water heater typically lasts anywhere from 8 to 15 years. It kind of depends on the type of water heater, but usually gas is recommended if you can choose between water heaters. But electric is going to last just slightly longer.
Yep, and then an air conditioning unit as well. Typically people get like a bundle deal more than likely. So oftentimes if people are replacing their furnace, they're also replacing their air conditioning unit. So an inspector is definitely going to be checking on the mechanicals of things. It depends on time of year if they can test all of the different things. So right now it's like negative 100 outside, something like that.
Too cold.
Yeah, so right now it's too cold because if somebody were to kick on the air conditioning unit, like what's going to come in, of course, cold air, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the air conditioning unit is working.
Right.
Because it's too cold to test it. Same thing with the furnace. If it's 90 degrees outside and an inspector tries to kick on a furnace, well, it's hot outside and it's blowing hot air in, and it's because it's hot outside. So it's very weather dependent. But typically an inspector is going to be able to look at the lifespan of it, or the age I should say, and the condition, and determine whether or not they think that it's something to have an HVAC professional look at further.
Mm-hmm.
All right, what's another common item that comes up?
Another common item is radon. This is an elective test, right? But it's not...
well, actually all inspections are elective. We just encourage you to get inspections. But there's an inspection, and then we have a couple other items that we can add on during our inspection period.
Mhm.
One of those is a radon test.
Mhm.
So what is radon? A lot of people don't even know what radon is.
Yeah, it's one of those silent but deadly gases.
Silent but deadly?
This is not.
All right.
No, it's a silent or
Silent. It's
What
a
am I
silent
thinking?
but deadly.
Clear. It's an unseen gas.
Yeah.
But if there's high levels of radon, which there is in some areas, like I know Maple Grove can be high in radon.
Well, I mean,
in a lot
pretty
of
much the
areas.
entire Twin Cities metro
Mhm.
tends to have higher levels of radon than the rest of the country because we have a high degree of limestone in our soil. So radon is a naturally occurring gas, and it is associated with increased risk of getting cancer. So not saying that it's going to give you cancer if you have too high levels of radon, but it is associated with that. So it's a good idea to get your radon tested.
Mhm.
If you get your radon tested, there's every house is going to have some bits of radon in it.
Mhm.
Every single house. So if you have like granite countertops, that emits levels of radon. So not saying that that's bad, it's just that there is some safe levels, and then there's some levels where we would say, hey, we should do something about these radons, and typically radon level. And typically what you're going to be doing is installing a radon mitigation system if your levels of radon are too high.
Mhm.
Now even with new construction always comes with a passive radon mitigation system, but that's not an active radon mitigation system. So you can still test for it and see if you need to convert that passive system to an active system.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's definitely something that you can either negotiate if that's something that scares you, or it's something that you can pay for yourself. It's really worth it, and not worth losing a deal over if you can put in a radon mitigation system. So definitely not something to be too scared of, just something
Yeah,
to
don't
check.
be scared of it. I've had people that have had radon levels 20 times higher than recommended, put in a radon mitigation system, and shoots right back down to within the acceptable range. So
Mhm.
don't be too scared about radon, it's just we want to be aware of it.
Mhm. So what's next? What's another?
Ooh, what's next? What's next? What's next? All right, one of the things that always comes up, well, I shouldn't say always, but one of the things that often comes up is electrical. So electrical, you want to talk further about that?
Yeah, so with electrical, there are certain codes that the outlets and things need to be up to code for. GFCI outlets are one thing, so those need to be within any area, basically kitchens and bathrooms. If it's within a certain distance from running water, it needs to have a GFCI outlet.
So what that means is, you probably remember like those 1980 commercials, or maybe you don't. I do. You remember those commercials where people would like drop a hairdryer or a toaster in the sink and then they would get electrocuted? GFCI prevents that, so it pretty much is going to trip the outlet if anything that could shock you gets in contact with that water. So you definitely want to have GFCI next to water sources.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's something that comes up a lot on FHA, I believe, because it's one of their requirements.
Yep, and inspectors will, an inspector is going to look at that as well, and they're going to always recommend that if it's near a water source, then the outlet is GFCI protected.
Mm-hmm. Yep, and then another thing that sometimes can come up, but again is one of the extra elective tests that you can do is a sewer scope. So this is somebody who's going to literally take a scope, is it like a camera,
Mm-hmm.
I believe, and
Yep.
then they just scope through. There's usually like I don't know what it's called.
They go through the main.
The main.
Yep, they go through the main, and then what they're doing is they're looking for tree root infestation or something else that is causing some sort of breakages or cracks in the water main. So typically if you're, let's just say that you're turning on your sink and it's having a hard time going down and you've already, snaked the drain and you've already used like the liquid plumber and everything else, might be a good idea to do a sewer scope because you might have something else that's backing it up closer to the curb of the house.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and definitely worth it for some people if you're a little bit more scared about your older homes. I live in a home built in 1880, so I know we got one just to be sure that there wasn't anything too crazy going on.
Yep, or else if there's like big trees right next to the house, that would be another good indication that, hey, maybe I should get a sewer scope for the house.
Yeah.
Next, windows. So windows are fairly important things. It helps you get fresh air with the house, it helps you get natural sunlight, and it also is one of those things that we want to make sure it has a proper seal, especially when it's negative 100 out like today. You want to make sure that you have a proper seal. So that's something that oftentimes will come up during an inspection. So maybe like a broken seal on a window, or maybe like mechanisms are faulty or something else.
Mm-hmm.
So it really depends on what the issue is with the window, but if it's a broken seal, that's actually a really simple fix. You can just replace the window pane itself, not the entire window. I'm not going to promise what the fixes are, but oftentimes an inspector will tell you exactly what needs to happen in order to get this fixed, and usually it's not necessarily that expensive either.
Yeah, something to work with again.
Yep.
And then one other big item that comes up often is the roof, for very obvious reasons.
It's expensive.
Yes, but it is something that if you own a home for a long time, eventually you're going to have to deal with it. Just one of those things like mechanicals as well. It might not last forever. So with a roof, there might be hail damage. There might be like even just some issues with the shingles or how they were installed, things like that. It could even come up on a new construction home if there was something installed improperly. Or things like ice dams and leaks that might leak into the ceiling of the home, which you don't want. So
right, and that's definitely worthwhile to have an inspector take a look at a roof. Sometimes it really is going to be weather dependent for whether or not an inspector can actually walk on the roof. So let's just say that it's sleeting outside. Maybe an inspector isn't going to want to go up to their death on a roof, But oftentimes they can look even from the ground and they can see whether or not they think that there's going to be something that they should pursue or look at further.
And they usually tell you the age, so you know, like kind of the general timeline to watch out for when you might need to think about replacing your roof as well.
Yeah, and roofs are very variable.
Yeah.
There we go. And so especially with roofs, I'm not a contractor, but what I can say is that you can get shingles that last like 15 years, or you can get shingles that last 50 years. So it really depends on the quality of the shingles that are put on the roof. It also depends on, if a tornado came through and like tore off all the shingles for the house, even if you have a 50-year roof, you are going to probably need a new roof, and that might be an insurance claim for the current homeowner. So those are, I would say, the most common items that come up during inspection. Now that's not to say that other items won't come up during inspection, and it's not to say that all of these items will come up during inspection either. But like we said before, it's part of our job to kind of walk you through that process. So the inspector is there to help guide you and say, here's all the different issues that I found with the house. Not a guarantee of the condition of the home, but it does help you understand, like, here are some issues that the inspector did find. Our job as real estate agents is to help you understand what are your options in moving forward, whether you're the buyer or you're the seller. It's our job to help try to make people come together and determine what can we do so that the buyer feels comfortable moving into the house.
Right. And another note on inspections is that they might cost a couple $100, $400 to $600, somewhere in there, but it's usually always worth it to do it. We always recommend it just because then you know kind of like the owner's manual to your home. Like what do you need to think about, what costs might be associated with buying this home? Are these issues that you're okay with having? Or is there any surprises that maybe you want to talk about with your realtor and your family or something? So
that's all we have for today. If you are thinking about buying or selling, make sure that you reach out to us. I'm Rebekah at tailoredrealtyteam.com.
And Leah at tailoredrealtyteam.com.
We hope that you have a great day. Thank you for tuning in.
Thank you.